Hey guys, welcome back to Home Built, and this week we are continuing working on the engine of the Frankenhauler. All right, well, as you guys know, we've been doing world-class giveaways all year. So giving away welders and a whole bunch of stuff to you guys. And this month is no exception. We have something that I have needed for a long time. Now, one of the issues I often have with working in the garage is I don't have an oxyacetylene torch because I just can't justify. I use it so infrequently. The trouble is all I've really got is one of these things to try and get things hot. And it's not hot enough. It just does not get hot enough. And that is this month's giveaway with World Class is this. This is an LPG torch. So it runs off of a regular barbecue LPG cylinder. So you don't need special stuff. Most of us have got these things sitting around, and this thing gets a little bit hotter than the old map gas torch. If I get it going. Holy moly! Yeah, this thing gets just a little bit hotter than that. So I am now going to be able to heat up and bend metal with one of these. And thanks to World Class, they are giving away one of these LPG torches this month. So head down to the link in the description, go over to their site and fill out all the details. If you want to see the winners of all the competitions, they're all posted up on World Class's site. That's all World Class is doing it. So yeah, very big thank you to World Class. And yeah, this thing is going to come in handy, particularly when I have to bend stuff. All right, guys, welcome back. And those of you who were watching last time will have seen that I completely stripped down, cleaned up and painted the chassis of the bus/truck. Removed the engine, and I've painted that as well. If you missed it, I'll put a link up above so you can catch up. And like always, do the things like subscribe and comment, all that sort of stuff. Helps out that mysterious algorithm. So, today, what we've got to do is we have to mount this engine back into the chassis 240mm rearwards. Now, the reason for that, if you missed it, was when I sat the cab onto the truck, when it was the bus, the engine sits really far forward. When I put the cab of the truck on, the engine will actually be sticking out past the front of the truck. So I have to move it rearwards so that I can fit everything in and make it look like a truck again. To do that, there's a few things I need to change, one of which is the sump. Currently, the sump on the Toyota Coaster is at the front of the engine, and that's not going to work because when I move it rearwards, it's going to interfere with the cross member. But I have a plan for that. But before we get to that, let's get it up, get the oil drained out of it, and remove the sump because there's a few things I need to do first. Wow, that is some black oil. This thing hasn't been serviced in a long time. The guy I bought it off of is a mate, and I know he's a little bit rough. And yeah, this thing's been left, but these things will run forever, even as it is. It still had oil in it, it still runs okay. But yeah, I think it's definitely due for a service. Well, yes, the black continues. This is a very, very black underside of this engine. The oil is so thick. So next thing I'm going to do is remove the pickup, and then we'll get into what we're going to do next. All right, so I had to take the sump off because, as I mentioned, the front sump was going to get in the way of the subframe at the front and I wouldn't be able to get it on there. So I just went and bought myself a sump for a Toyota Land Cruiser. So this is the same engine, but this sump is obviously at the rear, so I should be able to get away with that. And then I also bought myself a Land Cruiser rear pickup. So these are all off-the-shelf parts. They're relatively affordable and available. So while I've got the sump off, if you actually head over to the skid factory, Alan Woody did a video on doing a turbo conversion on one of these engines. And while they're at it, these just have a thing apparently where the big end bearings can wear out. Apparently there might have been a bit of a factory issue or something at the time. I don't know whether this engine will be affected, but while I'm here, it's relatively straightforward to change it. I've taken a punt and bought standard bearings. They're actually reasonably affordable. It's not expensive, so while I'm here, it's all apart. I'm going to pull off the caps of the big ends, work my way through, just double check and make sure that they're all within spec. And yeah, and then we can button it up after that. So first things first, let's remove the front end cap and just do some measuring and just see how it all looks. All right, so I've pulled the first bearing out and there is some slight wear, but nothing crazy. It actually doesn't look too bad. But I pulled out the bearings out of the packet that I ordered, and without even taking them out of the pack, I can tell that I got the wrong bearings, and because there's a huge difference in size. It's probably not easy to see on camera. I'm not sure if that's showing on camera. You can see the diameter is different, and yeah, I checked again. These are main bearings and I need big end bearings. So they're the wrong bearings. They are for this engine, but they're the wrong ones. So I'm going to send these bearings back and see if I can get the correct ones sent out, the ones that I actually need. And yeah, we will move forward with what I can do for now. All right, so even though I messed up and ordered main bearings instead of big end bearings, before I sent them back, I thought I would get out the micrometer and actually measure the Comrod journals and make sure that we're in spec. And they are still in the factory spec. We can now move forward and order some correct bearings. So now I'm going to put that bearing cap back on. I'm going to torque it back up just because I don't want to leave it untorqued and that sort of thing. Then I'm going to put the sump back on, but I'm not going to glue it into place. I'm just going to lightly bolt it up, just so then we can use this engine, put it in and out for mock-up. So let's do that. All right, before I put the sump back on the engine, even for mock-up, while it's nice and clean, I am going to future-proof it a little bit. I haven't announced it properly, but yes, I will be adding a turbo to the engine for the truck. Like I mentioned before, Skid Factory did a fantastic video on it. It's a really simple thing to do. Basically, you chuck the turbo on and wind in a bit more fuel into the one fuel screw. That's basically it. It is a very simple thing to do, besides the sort of the plumbing fabrication involved in putting a turbo on. But one of the plumbing fabrication things you need is you need a return line, an oil return line. You need oil feed and oil return to feed the turbo. And I have gone and seen my friends at Raceworks and got a weld-on -10 fitting that I'm going to drill a hole in the side of the sump here and weld it in while it's out and nice and clean. So let's do that. All right, so I've gone through now and I've marked the center of where the front engine mounts are, and then marked 240 mil back and put marks on the chassis so I can work out roughly how far back I need to align them. Same on this side, I've marked the mount and the chassis here, and then up further. So I have a solid reference from where I can go back and work that out. Now, while I'm talking about moving things rearward, I was mentioning before about all the possibilities of what to do with this rear axle. So basically, because I'm moving the engine back 240 mil, I have to do something about the attachment in the middle somehow. So the options are shorten the tail shaft 240 millimeters, or move this rear axle back somehow 240 millimeters. Now, I was keen on moving the axle back, mostly just because by moving it back, it gives me less overhang on the back, gives me a more balanced looking tray, and all of that sort of to me was sort of swaying me in that direction. I've done a fair bit of research on what I can do. In theory, I could potentially cut the mounts off and move it all back, but because of the way the reinforcings are, that's not really a good option. The other option is that I can cut the chassis in half and extend it. There is rules around that, but it's just going to be, it opens myself up to all these big issues with engineering, and some engineers might not like it, some won't. And I'm still not actually sure whether I can run this on a car license or on a truck license. My current thinking is I'm trying to get it so that I can run it on a car license, which means I need to keep the gross vehicle mass under 4.5 ton. So I'm hoping if I can keep the entire build under 3 ton, then I have a 1.5 ton payload, which is heaps for all the cars that I'm going to put on this. It's not going to have a giant tray. If I keep the tray at 4.4 meters, the biggest car I have is the Rockster, which is 4.3 meters long, and that's not even the wheelbase. I'm not sure how much the back of it can hang over the back of the tray, but the wheels are going to be well and truly on. So, like I said, there are options, and that's where my head's at the moment. My head is at just shorten the tail shaft, easiest option, and do that. I haven't confirmed, but we'll just see. So I think now I need to get in and start cutting off those front engine mounts so we can work out where we need to put them. So my plan was to very gently cut through the welds and then use a hammer and chisel to peel back the factory engine mounts. The issue that I ended up having is that I didn't discover one of the welds, and it took me quite a while, and yeah, it was a lot more difficult than I thought. At least once I got to the other side, I knew what I was doing, and it was relatively straightforward. All right, well, that was a lot of grinding to cut these engine mounts off. I have to cut them off anyway, and it saves me a lot of reinventing the wheel by reusing these as much as I can. I will have to modify them, I think, but it took a bit to cut them off because I didn't realise until a long way into it that there was actually a slot in here. I never noticed the slot. This has all been folded back since, but it was welded along that edge. So I was cutting and grinding and getting in there, and I just couldn't get it to come free, and realised there was a strip of weld there holding it in. So once I did that, the second one came off pretty easy. So we've got these off. Now it's time to do some rough measurements to sort of roughly work out where the engine mounts are going to go. And then I think I will attach them to the engine and try and sort of hover it into space and see how that works. All right, so I have the engine loosely in place. So this mount is pretty much down to where I want it to be. It is interfering a little bit here. I'm going to have to trim it on this side a little bit. The height of the engine is good, so it is a little bit higher than it was before, but you can see it's sort of slightly higher on one side, so you can see this mount needs to be trimmed to go down and sit over the cross member there. So I'll mark and trim that out and work out where I need to cut it, but that's pretty close to where it needs to be. And I may have been blessed on the back. I've got to double check, but basically the cross member, this is where the gearbox mount used to mount up to, and obviously now it is further rearward back here. Where this bolts onto the chassis, it bolts on, there's 4 bolts there. There's another 2 bolt holes further back that weren't used. They look like they're the same spacing as these bolts. So I'm thinking that I may just be lucky enough to unbolt this and move it back and bolt it on here. And then if I take these mounts off and swap them from side to side, so instead of going backwards, they go forwards, I may be in the ballpark without having to do a whole bunch of fabrication. So let's mark out these engine mounts and see if we can make this all work.
So I start by tidying up the engine mounts and sort of trimming off the excess so that they fit nicely into place. Then I start work on the rear by unbolting the gearbox cross member and also swapping around the mounts on the gearbox itself. I tried knocking the cross member with a mallet and eventually realised there were bolts on the underside of the chassis rail as well, so that made it much easier to move once I completely unbolted it and moved it rearward into position.
Alright, so I moved the mount backwards, but I'm still off by a bit. The engine's not in the perfect spot at the front, but I think I can actually flip the cross member bar around the other way, and you can sort of see that it's currently, the mount is offset forward. If it's offset backwards, I think it's going to be much closer to where I need it. So let's try that and try it again. Alright, looks like I wasn't quite lucky enough with the gearbox mounts. They are still, you can see where the bolt is, it doesn't quite line up, but I think I can change this mount. I'm going to keep these bolting points and just change this mount. It will be sitting back and obviously cantilevering a bit more, but I'll leave the mount that's currently there and add on to it and extend it so that it actually sits in a nice spot. Going to the front, this is close to where I need it. Again, the engine's sitting higher in this truck than it was before, so I'm going to have to clearance out a bit more so that in the future I can get bolts out if need be. So I'm going to clearance this out and I'll have to reinforce the engine mount down lower, and I'll probably triangulate things and make extra bracing to hold the engine mounts into place, which is not a big deal, on both sides. So we have it roughly in place. I am overall quite happy.
So I also realised I had to trim the existing gearbox mount because in this position it interferes with the heatsink on the side of the gearbox.
Alright, so the engine mounts didn't line up, so I had to unbolt them and swing them out of the way, and also clearance this heatsink for the gearbox on that mount there. So I've just sort of hacked it out of the way for the time being, and I can tidy that up. The issue I'm having now that I just noticed is it's not quite sitting on the mounts, and the gearbox is sitting on the cross member on the bottom. So I need to get that up a little bit higher, which I can do by raising the mounts up. I'm going to make some new mounts that box over the top of this existing mount. But I think for the time being, we are pretty close to where I want the engine. So I think now it's time to test the cab. And before I weld anything or do anything else, I think I need to get the cab back onto the chassis and see if it's going to work.
So thankfully the cab of this truck is extremely light and I can manhandle it by myself without too much drama.
All right, cab is on the chassis, but it still needs to come another 60 mil further forward. So at the moment we have a little bit of room behind the engine there, you know, maybe 40 mil or so, but still not enough. And if we go around the other side, we have the inlet plenum here that's going to need a little bit of clearancing as well. So there is basically some space on the firewall that I need to open up to get that through. Now, there is space on the inside. I have been thinking a lot, and I'm probably going to make this a two-seater anyway. Originally I was thinking about keeping a bench seat, but 2 seats is heaps. Most of the time it's going to be one person in here, just me in here anyway, so I think a single-seater is fine. So the next thing I need to do is cut out this firewall and make some clearance for the engine. Now, that's the reason why I didn't go through and do any repairs or anything on the firewall in the past, because I knew I had to do things. It's not going to hurt. There's plenty of space to space out the firewall and fix it up inside. I knew that was going to be the case, so let's start marking and then start trimming.
So at this stage I'm only loosely trimming out the firewall as I'm going to fabricate something later, but I thought getting it midway through the curve will make it easier to blend at a later stage.
All right, it's starting to look a bit like what it's going to look like. Now, the cab is loosely in place, but it's not exactly where it needs to be. There's a little bit of tweaking. The headlight panel in the front is actually going to come down slightly because these rails on the bus actually kick up slightly, whereas on the original truck, they're just flat. So I'm going to have to notch up sort of into this lower bumper sort of section to get it to sit down, probably 20 mil or so, a bit lower. But the ballpark is there. It's going to work. Let me take you through it now and show you how everything is sitting. All right, so I've got to remove the steering box to actually sort of get this nose sitting exactly where it needs to sit. But you get a rough idea of the front. This still has to come back further and go down because this part here lines up with that there. So this is all supposed to be together. And as you can see, we've got tons of room behind here for activities, particularly as I said, this is still got to go further forward. So there's plenty of room for radiators and everything else. There's plenty of height for engine because the bonnet starts all the way up here. We've got plenty of height over the top of the engine moving forward. So the cab is going to pretty much fit now. We are still sort of we're interfering in little places. There's going to be some work on the firewall side of things. As you can see, there's quite a gaping hole there. It doesn't actually protrude that much further back than the original one. There's plenty of space there to build a doghouse for that. I believe that's what hot rodders call that thing. But ultimately, the main purpose of all that was just to make sure I've got the engine in the correct spot. Now I'm happy with that. Let's strip this body back off again and start welding in engine mounts and securing it where it's supposed to be.
So as the engine is now sitting higher in the chassis than it was before, I'm trimming down these engine mounts and just cutting and bending until they sit roughly where I want them to.
All right, so I've modified my engine mounts. I sort of cut a wedge out and hammered them down, and I ground a bit of a chamfer into them so that there's plenty of space for welding penetration in there. And that is one side. There's a little bit of a gap, but not too much there. And same on this side. I've ground it down and made it all look good. So I will come back and box this in later and add extra reinforcing going down just to make doubly sure, but I think these are going to be nice sturdy engine mounts. Let's just tack everything in for now. And actually, to get the height right, I've actually got it, the sump sitting on a block of wood. That's a nice spacing there. And also, same on the back end, there's a block of wood underneath the gearbox so that I've got the right clearance everywhere around. Happy with the location. Let's burn it in.
So once I tacked in the front engine mounts, I started with the CAD, cardboard aided design, to just get a rough design of what I want for my rear gearbox mounts. Then I transferred my cardboard aided design to computer aided design. Then I designed up some much more accurate mounts that I can cut out on my CNC plasma table.
Oh, I didn't drill it.
So my first attempt, I forgot to add the slotted bolt holes. I had to go through and modify the design and cut it again.
All right, that plasma cutter from World Class with the plasma table is a cheat code. Being able to just design up my gearbox mount and then just cut it out is a game changer. So I've basically cut this. I've got the slots for the bolts. So the bolts need to be able to drop down into it on an angle. So that's why there's slots there. And these long slots you can see here, this is so I can bend it because this is 5mm thick steel plate. There is no way I can bend solid 5mm thick steel plate unless I actually put these relief cuts in here. So I'm going to clean this up now, bend it up, and then I can weld in where I bend it and sort of reinforce these joints. So let's see if this works the way I hoped it would.
So to start by just cleaning off all the slag that the plasma leaves behind and then bend them roughly into shape. So before I can weld on the new mounts, I need to drill holes through the old mounts to make sure I can still access the nuts with a socket. Now I'm happy with the location and can go through and tack everything in.
Alright, so I've burned in all of the engine mounts and I've actually made myself these standoffs now for the rear gearbox mounts. They're nice and solid, all made out of 5mm plate. So I think they're going to do the job. It's not the prettiest, but they will definitely do. All right, so we have the engine in place. So we've got the rear gearbox mounts all sitting in place. The engine is all sitting on its own weight in the chassis, on its engine mounts. Very happy with that. I do need to come back and I'm going to put a couple of triangular braces on the front engine mounts on both sides. But I'm going to have to tackle those extra reinforcing braces on the front engine mounts next week because I am totally out of time. So I think that means it's time for Fun Facts with Mrs. Jeff.
Hey guys, over the Ford Model T's run, it was not used just as a family car. It actually had a very wide and diverse variety of uses. So this is at a time obviously when paved roads are really a rarity, and there were some paved footpaths, but they were really in just the major cities. The majority of the population worked in agriculture, and of course power tools were not readily available, didn't really exist even. But many people discovered that they could use the Ford Model T and they could mechanise it. So it was a form of motorised mechanation. Model T owners would replace a rear wheel with a drive pulley to drive a belt. The Model T was also extremely nimble. It was able to make steep climbs and traverse rocks and mud. And in addition, there were also dozens of companies who sold kits to convert the Model T to tractors. Some used the Model T engine for home-built aircraft, which sounds terrifying, and even the Polish military used them to be converted to armoured cars.
All right, I'm quite happy with the progress this week. It would be nice if I could leave the sump on this and I had the right bearings. They're ordered and they're on their way. Once I get them, then I can sort of tidy up the bottom of the engine and put that in, but at least now it's mounted in place, the gearbox is mounted. I'm very happy with the location, so we can sort of keep moving forward and hopefully some big steps will happen in the next few weeks. So,
Right.
yes.
I don't know why you just started rubbing our hands there, but it's kind of chilly actually, so
Yeah.
that is also why. So stay tuned, see what happens. If you want to support him, of course, there's Patreon, and subscribe. He loves your comments.
Yeah. All right, guys. We'll see you next
Bye,
time.
guys.
See ya. Mic check.
Mike.
Mike.
Bottle of wine, bottle of wine, bottle of wine.
Yeah.
Model T owners would remove a rear wheel and they would replace it with a drive belt to pull a drive pulley. No. And it was able to traverse mud, rocks, and even climb up walls. That's not true. I know I said that. And steep climbs because I couldn't remember.